Okay, y'all, so we're going to continue then with the lesson. So here we go. So the fourth reason is, of course, having this amazing amount of unskilled labor or semi-skilled labor that would come in mainly from people being displaced off the farms or from Europe, new immigration, Southern and Eastern Europe. And also, a lot of people had made a fortune during the Civil War. There was abundant capital. And of course, capital means money. And people had this money to invest because a lot of them had made money during the Civil War. I know we don't think of wars as money-making opportunities, but some people do. They sold ammunition, they made uniforms or whatever, and some of it was kind of trashy. In fact, we developed a word called shoddy, for really crappily made stuff, stuff that fell apart because it was called shoddy wool. That's where that term comes from. There was also money. That was the great Cyndi Lauper of the 1980s and 1990s telling us the truth. Money changes everything, and money did change everything. Also, we have a group of talented business people, the so-called entrepreneur. In French, entrepreneur means one who undertakes, not as an undertaker, like a guy that buries you, but an undertaker, they undertake a business. Also, we have the market growing tremendously during this time as the population increases, all these immigrants, people moving here, they're of course going to need stuff, and that helps. And of course, as we've said, the government is going to be hand in hand with business to help them go. And we can't ever underestimate how blessed the United States is to have these natural resources, many of them untapped, right? Native Americans, as we remember, did not have the numbers or really the desire to do that kind of damage to the environment. And so there were plentiful amounts of coal, wood, trees, whatever, to do that. Now, I've mentioned a little bit about the Transcontinental Railroad before. Remember, it connects the two halves of the United States. Here in this picture, you see the commemoration of the two railroads being built. I'll talk a little bit here in just a bit about somebody left off of that. And when this thing was finally finished, a golden spike was driven at the very end. Now, connected to the spike, and let's see if the picture comes up here. There you see them. They drove actually a silver spike, a kind of swirl spike, and finally a gold spike. And they had a telegraph line connected to it. Once again, that kind of figures into this whole thing as well too, right? The use of the telegraph. And so when that last bolt was driven in, it connected, it made a connection, it finished a circuit, and it sent a telegraph message with the word done, D-O-N-E. And it was probably the first live event that people all around the nation would have actually heard that this was done. The United States from East Coast to West Coast was now finally united by railroad. Now, when I was a kid and I heard about that golden spike, y'all, I was always wondering like, I wonder if that spike is still around today. I wonder if it is still there. And secretly and quietly, I plotted to get that. And one day, one night, y'all, this is it. I got it. The golden spike. Yeah, there it is. And I've had it for years. Nobody knows that I have it. It's been kept on the down low. Actually, no, it's actually gilded, y'all. Remember how we talked about the Gilded Age? This is an ordinary spike, and I spray painted it with a gold paint, kind of my version of a gilded spike. And guess what? Somebody stole it. The student actually thought it was real. And so this is like spike number 2. But anyway, there you go. Now, this is the real spike. It looks a little bit better, and it's at Stanford University, and you'll figure out why in just a sec. And there's a close-up of the real spike at Stanford University. It was removed immediately after the ceremony and that. Okay, it went from Omaha, Nebraska, all the way to Sacramento, California. Here you can see it, Omaha, Nebraska, all the way to Sacramento, California, just a little north, I guess, of San Francisco. And of course, as I've said before, and one of the great examples of how the railroads were helped by the government, which of course then in turn the railroads inspired all kinds of other things. They were given land and of course money as payment. And you can see here the way it kind of worked. You got the railroad, and obviously you had the right of way for a few feet on either side of it, on each side of it. And then also what they would do, the government would kind of share patches of land. The ones here in sort of the pinkish color are federal ones. The other ones say were the government ones. So in a way, y'all, the government made money by helping the railroads make the land more profitable. They, of course, now had land that was worth more than it had been before because of the railroads going there. So when they sold it, they too could make money. Now, the Chinese were used as laborers to build much of the western part. I think I've already talked about this. They were very, very successful. They endured terrible, terrible working conditions to do this. These workers, of course, had been brought over, of course, or had come over on their own will to be miners. But a lot of that job was, those jobs were taken away from when they were alone expected to pay really, really high fees to get their miner's license. Irish immigrants, former slaves, Confederates built much of the eastern section. And of course, working conditions were dangerous, but at least the pay was low, right? Da-dong-ching, right? And, you know, many people died in landslides. The Chinese, like I said, they might be hung from baskets to do work on the sides of a cliff to maybe make a little ledge for it. They would pull on the rope after setting the explosives. And if they didn't get up in time, or maybe the guy wasn't paying attention, maybe checking his text or emails, I don't know, it would blow up and they might be killed. So anyway, there you go. Now, an interesting change in our very perception of time happens as a result of the railroads. Because, of course, you know, we had used what was called local time before, railroads are going to necessitate the use of what we call time zones today. You guys all know this. If you're watching the Astros or the Rockets out in California, you know the game's going to start probably at 9 o'clock, not 7 o'clock. On the other hand, if the Astros are up here playing the Yankees or something, you know the 7 o'clock game is going to start at 6 o'clock. Time zones are part we have, you know, 4, right? We got Eastern, we got Central, which you and I live in, we got Mountain, and of course we have Pacific time. There's even like a Hawaiian and Alaskan time and all that out there too. So why were these needed? Well, what people used before, as I said, was called local time. And it was based purely on the sun. Now, the sun, of course, at noon is directly overhead. So you would base time on that. Now, think how slow people move. If some guy was 50 or 100 miles away and I'd take a little buggy to his place, it'd be a gradual change in time. And I'd get there and I'd just readjust my watch to his time. It might be 5, 10, 15 minutes different where the noon was. But nobody really seemed to matter because things move much more slowly. With trains, y'all, going speeds of like 35, 40, 50 miles an hour, they had to come up with a way to make time the same for everybody, at least in an area. And this is why. Most of the train tracks are single way. You don't have like the one going out this way or this way. It's just too expensive. And so what you couldn't do, y'all, is have some guy coming through at his 2 o'clock and, you know, you're coming through at your 2 o'clock or whatever, and you run into each other. And so they basically said, look, you know, we have to have these time zones and we have to have them where you're going to be able to not have train crashes. And of course, they would occasionally have side tracks where you could pull over and let the other train pass, as they still do. And this is where you and I get the phrase, you got sidetracked, right? You know, you're doing your schoolwork and you get sidetracked by playing on the net or whatever. And so we use largely longitude lines called meridians to do this. And like I said, it literally changed our view of time. Now, you don't need to know these guys. I used to spend some time on them. These are the 4 main men responsible. And I mentioned this guy. And by the way, in that last picture, I forgot to tell you who was not included in that picture. I told you the story how they cut out the champagne. But when it came time to take the pictures, sadly, the Chinese workers were not asked to participate in the picture, nor were the African-American workers. So, you know, when they're busy kind of redoing history, photoshopping, you know, taking champagne bottles out, maybe they should Photoshop back in some Chinese workers and some of those African-American workers as well, too. But you see this guy named Leland Stanford. Now, Leland Stanford had a son who passed away at a young age. Now, he had made a fortune on the railroad. And so he decided to create a university in honor of his son. That university is called Stanford University. And since he was one of the big guys behind the railroad, that is why the Golden Spike is there. So if any of y'all go to Stanford, an amazing school, I had some friends go there. They didn't call back Mr. D. But anyway, when I applied, but you can go see the original Golden Spike. Now, I just want to tell you a little story here, just to show you some of the courage of some of these people. Now, this man's name is William Thompson. We'll call him Bill because I had a friend named Bill Thompson for a lot of years. Now, to build a railroad, I don't know if you guys have ever done it, you know, railroads have to go up a very narrow kind of grade. That is sort of hill. They can't just go up and down like cars or something. And so his job was out there surveying to make sure and to see how much of a rise they were going to have to deal with and how much grading would have to be done to make the railroad go up. So he's out there working in front. Now, as I told you, Native Americans knew that bad things were going to come of this iron horse. And so he was out there working when a group of Native Americans attacked and killed the whole party he was with. And they assumed that they had killed him. And as sometimes happens, Native Americans, some of them take scalps. That is, they cut the top. I don't know if you've ever taken a scalp, y'all, but you cut, start right across here, you go across, then you rip off the top of it. And so they took his scalp, right? And of course, I can't imagine how painful that must have been for a guy who was still alive, because he was still alive. And so the Native Americans decided to camp pretty close by because it was late in the evening when they had attacked. Well, obviously, he woke up with an incredible pain, headache. And when the Indians were asleep, he crawled over, y'all, and he went through their bag of scalps. And guess what? He found his own scalp. He then took it. He made his way back for miles until he found where the railroad had been built, made his way to a train, and then the train took him back into town. They got him some basically pickle juice to preserve his scalp. So this is what he looked like on the top of his head, where they had literally cut off this patch of his head, right, of his scalp. Now, they tried to reattach it. They tried to sew it back on, but it kept getting infected, and he just couldn't keep his scalp on. And so what happened to the scalp, y'all say? Well, guess what? It's been preserved. So,
excuse me while I whip this out.
There is his scalp. It used to be on display, but they thought it gave a negative view of Native Americans. So they took the scalp away. But I guess if you go to the museum up there in Nebraska, the Union Pacific, and you say, hey, I want to see the scalp, slip them a $5, and maybe, they'll let you see the scalp. You just heard the railroad explosion. Now, in addition to that one transcontinental railroad, there will be 4 others built. In 1865, at the end of the Civil War, there was a total of 35,000 miles of railroad in the entire country. By 1900, really kind of the time ending of this period, there's over 192,000, right? That's an increase. I don't know. That's a lot of math for Mr. D to do, 25 or so. And you can see them running all over. Now, all of these railroads, except for one, were basically built with government assistance, subsidies, that is money, or land grants, okay? Another thing, remember how we mentioned that a big thing that's gonna happen is new markets are gonna open up? Whether the stuff was coming out of Chicago or coming out of New Orleans or even H-Town, Bayou City, Rocketown, it could make its way by train to places like this place, City of Angels, Los Angeles, right? Or to San Francisco or Tacoma. And from there, ships could take it overseas. That's right. I know it sounds like crackhead talk, but once upon a time, y'all, we actually sold stuff to China and Japan. I know. I'm not making this up, y'all. It's true. We actually used to do that. Now, Commodore Vanderbilt, a man you'll hear more about later, he is going to make a fortune by doing this. And here you see a picture of Vanderbilt, because what he's going to do is take over a bunch of small railroads. And this is the kind of way a lot of the big businesses did. They drove out of business the small ones, and they consolidated them into big ones with less competition, okay? In the meantime, though, he did do some good. He made sure that he standardized a lot of things like the gauge, that is the width of the railroads there. He also introduced the steel rail because, believe it or not, people used to use wooden rails. And I kid you not, y'all, they would have a wooden rail with a little piece of steel on the top, because steel had been kind of expensive. You're sitting there, you're riding on your train, chilling, and all of a sudden, boing, here comes a piece of the metal right through the darn cabin into you, right? And then they also early ones, y'all, used to blow up all the time, man. It was like, oh, there goes another one. So they started actually putting sort of like cotton bales and stuff between the main cab and the others. And in the early days, before they had tops on them, y'all, they would have embers and stuff that would fall down on top of you, okay? Now, George Westinghouse is going to have an invention called the air brake, which made it a lot safer to stop a train. You know, if you ever just stop everything at one time, the train is going to derail, right? It's going to come off the tracks. Once you get another phrase like, man, you're off the tracks, you got off the rail. But Westinghouse introduces that. Now, George Pullman, you'll learn more about him later, is going to develop a type of two cars that really is going to make it possible to travel across the country. One of the first things here, y'all, he's going to develop are the sleeping car. So here you see it here, y'all, the regular type of seats that people will have during the day. But what will happen at nighttime, of course, let's see if this works. Yeah, there we go. You could pull it down and boom, you'd have a bed there. Now, the ones I've been in since then, they actually kind of have a little thing here to protect you, and the bottom one becomes a bed. But this allowed people to go across country and for the train to continue moving during the night. Also, he developed the dining car where you could sit and do that. So Pullman is going to become rich. James Rich, y'all. He's even going to develop a community called Pullman, Illinois, where the workers all worked on making sleeping cars and dining cars. And there'll be a big, big strike there, but that's later on. So the railroad, y'all, really creates a revolution. Okay, first of all, it's going to create this giant, giant market for raw materials that are American made, for manufactured goods in America. It is the thing that really opens it up. Among other things, too, it's really going to create a national market. I'm going to mention beer, not because I'm advocating its use or anything, but because I just know a little bit about the history. Every little town, y'all, and it's kind of come back to that again now in some ways, but every town, y'all, used to have its own brewery, right? And the thing is, because you really couldn't transport it. Well, when you start developing the railroads, well, why does every town need one? Some big towns, St. Louis, with all these German immigrants, or Wisconsin, you know, the state of Wisconsin can have a brewery and they can make the stuff and they can ship it to other people. So you start seeing some little local businesses go under as national markets develop and national manufacturers who can make the stuff much more efficiently. Some other impacts of the railroad, immigration, right? Because if you got to the cities, you know, you landed in Philadelphia, Boston, New York, New Orleans, you didn't have to wait around. You could get on the train and you could go out west if you had the money, like the some of the Germans would, or the people, the Swedes and the Finns, like my wife's great-great-great-grandparents who came over. So it's going to stimulate immigration. We've already mentioned the time zones, right? The very nature of how you and I judge time is going to be created. Now, daylight savings time, that's a whole different thing. I know some of you are probably asking about that, but that was created basically as a way for us to get more work out of people during the war. You know, they could have more daylight hours, not to be with their friends and family, but to be working in the factories with natural light. Okay, and then there you see an example of the Eastern, Central, Mountain, West Pacific, and there's Alaska and Hawaiian times. Bye-bye. Okay, some more impact of it, okay? The standard of living of the Industrial Revolution, that's what IR means here, is going to rise greatly. And America's standard of living is going to be the highest in the entire world, y'all, for a lot of years because of what we're able to buy, what we're able to have. Urbanization, all these various factories are going to spring up as a result as well, okay? Because as people move to the cities, of course, they're moving there because the factories are going to need them. Sadly, too, y'all, the workplace, as you and I know it, is going to get very, very regimented. Instead of you being able to kind of go to work, you know, at your own house, with your own pace and your own time, and set your own hours and your own prices, instead you become a big cog in the machine, right? You know, they start telling you the time, they'll blow the whistle. You got to be at work. You do certain jobs, okay? And another thing is, it is going to open up a lot of careers for women. For example, women are going to get jobs in typing. I mentioned this kind of before in the other lecture, I think. But as business began to open up, a man's going to develop by the name of Scholes is going to develop a typewriter. And this is going to allow him to type and to do some things. Also stenography, that is writing down what people say. And when the telephone gets invented in 1876, switchboards. Because of women working, a lot more women, y'all, are going to delay their marriages. And of course, by waiting longer, the time that women can have children is going to be delayed. And the result is going to be smaller families than you had on the farm. You know, when you worked on the farm, man, you had a lot of kids, right? Every kid was like, that's another worker. Yeah, let's go do that again, you know?